The evening air in downtown Chicago carried the scent of rain and exhaust as Marcus Johnson walked quietly down Michigan Avenue, his worn backpack slung over his shoulder. At 28, he moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to make himself invisible, stepping lightly past the gleaming storefronts and bustling cafes where people half his age discussed million-dollar deals over overpriced coffee. No one knew that the quiet young man in the faded jacket carried 3 advanced degrees in computer science and cybersecurity. No one even noticed when he slipped into the 24-hour internet cafe each night, fingers flying across keyboards as he monitored network vulnerabilities for companies that would never hire him for an office position. His dark skin and the zip code on his ID had become barriers too high to climb, despite credentials that outshined most Silicon Valley executives. But when the blue and red lights flashed behind him that Tuesday evening, reflecting off the wet pavement like broken promises, Marcus felt his chest tighten. He hadn't been running, hadn't been shouting, hadn't done anything except exist in a neighborhood where his presence was apparently suspicious. "Hey, you there!" The officer's voice cut through the ambient city noise like a blade. Marcus stopped, his hands already moving to where they could be seen. A routine burned into his memory through years of careful navigation. Officer Rodriguez stepped out of the patrol car, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Where you headed in such a hurry?" "Just walking home from work, sir." Marcus's voice carried the practiced calm of someone who had learned that every interaction was a test he couldn't afford to fail. "Work?" Rodriguez's eyebrows raised skeptically as he took in Marcus's appearance. "What kind of work you do, son?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus could have mentioned his master's degree from MIT, could have explained the cybersecurity consultancy he ran from his one-bedroom apartment, protecting small businesses from hackers who could destroy their livelihoods with a few keystrokes, could have detailed the 18 patents he held in encryption technology, innovations that were making other people rich while he remained invisible. Instead, he said, "Computer repair, mostly." What Officer Rodriguez didn't know was that at that very moment, Marcus's phone was buzzing with alerts from a sophisticated monitoring system he'd designed. The city's emergency services network was under attack, and the firewall protecting Chicago's 911 dispatch system was failing. Traffic lights, hospital communications, and police dispatch channels were all at risk. And with just a few lines of code he could write blindfolded, Marcus was about to save the city from digital chaos. But first, he had to survive a traffic stop that threatened to derail everything he'd worked toward. The second officer emerged from the passenger side, his hand already reaching for his radio. "We got a call about someone matching your description in the area," he said, studying Marcus like he was solving a puzzle. Marcus felt his phone vibrate again, more urgently this time. Every second that passed meant more vulnerabilities exploited, more systems compromised. The attack he was monitoring wasn't just random. It was coordinated, sophisticated, and designed to cripple the city's infrastructure during peak evening hours when emergency services were most crucial. "Can you step over to the car, please?" Rodriguez's tone had shifted, becoming more formal, more dangerous. As Marcus complied, his mind raced through the implications. The cyber attack was escalating. In his backpack lay the laptop containing the only solutions that could stop it. But here he stood, hands visible, breathing steady, while the city's digital lifelines crumbled around them. Because sometimes the person who looks most out of place is exactly where they need to be to save everyone else. Before we continue with Marcus's incredible story, I want you to know that this channel is dedicated to sharing real stories of people who overcome impossible odds through their hidden talents and quiet strength. If these stories inspire you to see people differently and challenge your assumptions about who belongs where, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I'm curious, on a scale of 0 to 10, how often do you think we miss recognizing brilliant people simply because they don't look like what we expect brilliance to look like? Drop your number in the comments below. And if you've ever felt invisible or underestimated because of how others perceive you, know that your story matters too. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that expertise comes in all forms, and sometimes the most powerful solutions come from the most unexpected sources. Now let's see how Marcus's story unfolds. Marcus Johnson had lived in Chicago for 6 years, ever since he'd quietly returned from Boston with his MIT degrees and a heart full of optimism that had slowly crystallized into cautious realism. He'd moved into a small apartment in Bronzeville, spending his days applying for positions at tech companies that never called him back, despite qualifications that should have opened every door. The rejection emails all sounded the same. "While your background is impressive, we've decided to move forward with other candidates." The few times he'd gotten interviews, he could see the surprise in recruiters' eyes when he walked into their gleaming conference rooms. They'd expected someone different, someone who fit their mental image of what a cybersecurity expert should look like. But Marcus watched. He always watched. And what he saw was a digital landscape growing more dangerous by the day, with small businesses and community organizations falling victim to cyber attacks because they couldn't afford the enterprise-level security that big corporations took for granted. So he'd started small, offering his services to local shops and community centers, building a reputation one solved problem at a time. His clients trusted him because he understood their world. The corner grocery store owner who couldn't afford to lose a day's receipts to ransomware, the community health clinic that needed to protect patient data on a shoestring budget. On that particular Tuesday evening, Marcus had been returning from Rosa's Diner, a family-owned restaurant where he'd just finished installing a new point-of-sale security system. Rosa Martinez had paid him in cash and a plate of her famous empanadas, treating him with the respect that seemed so rare in professional settings. "Marcus, you saved our business," she'd said, watching him test the new encryption protocols. That last attack would have wiped out everything. Those words meant more to him than any corporate bonus ever could. But as he walked home through the changing neighborhood, where gentrification was slowly pushing out the families who'd welcomed him, Marcus felt the familiar weight of existing between worlds. As the police car's spotlight hit him, illuminating his face against the darkening street, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold through his earbuds. "This is dispatch. We're showing system-wide failures across the emergency network. Multiple hospitals reporting communication blackouts." Officer Rodriguez stepped closer, his radio crackling with increasingly frantic transmissions. "License and ID, please." Marcus moved slowly to retrieve his wallet, but those words weren't foreign to him. He'd heard similar alerts during his graduate research on infrastructure vulnerabilities. This wasn't just technical failure. This was a coordinated attack designed to maximize chaos and casualties. He whispered, "The emergency dispatch protocols are being overridden through the backup servers." "What did you say?" Rodriguez stopped mid-reach for his radio, eyes narrowing. "Nothing, sir. Just, your radio mentioned system failures. Sounds like a DDoS attack on the municipal network with possible lateral movement into critical infrastructure." Officer Chen, who had been approaching from the passenger side, paused. "A what attack?" Marcus could feel his professional instincts warring with his survival instincts. The young man who had learned to stay invisible was fighting with the expert, who knew that silence could cost lives. "The emergency services network is under cyber attack. Someone's trying to take down 911 dispatch, hospital communications, maybe even traffic control systems. Rodriguez exchanged glances with his partner. "And you know this how?" The question hung heavy between them. Marcus could feel the weight of assumptions, the dangerous territory he was entering. But through his earbuds, he could hear the dispatch calls becoming more desperate. Ambulances couldn't reach hospitals. Fire trucks were being routed to wrong addresses. The city's digital nervous system was shutting down. "Because I'm a cybersecurity consultant," he said quietly. "And right now, I'm monitoring an attack that's about to turn this city into chaos." Chen scoffed, looking Marcus up and down. "Cybersecurity consultant, right. And I'm the FBI." But Rodriguez was listening to his radio, where reports of system failures were multiplying. Traffic lights going dark. Hospital emergency rooms losing contact with ambulance dispatch. 911 calls being dropped or misdirected. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing them the monitoring dashboard he'd been watching. Lines of code scrolled past, showing real-time network intrusions and system compromises across the city's infrastructure. "This started 47 minutes ago," he explained, his voice steady despite the surreal situation. "It's a multi-vector attack targeting the redundancies in your emergency services network. Whoever planned this knows exactly how Chicago's systems are connected." Chen moved closer to look at the phone screen, his skepticism wavering as he saw data that matched what they were hearing on the radio. But deep inside Marcus, something had stirred. This wasn't just embarrassment or frustration. This was the moment when staying invisible could cost innocent lives, when his expertise mattered more than their preconceptions. And for the first time in years, he was ready to stop hiding who he really was. 20 minutes later, the three men still stood on Michigan Avenue, but the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Rodriguez's radio crackled constantly with reports of escalating system failures across the city, and Marcus's phone had become the center of their attention as alerts poured in from his monitoring network. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to cascading red warnings on his screen. "They've compromised the backup servers for fire department dispatch. Next will be the hospital network, then probably the power grid controllers." Officer Chen leaned in closer, his earlier skepticism replaced by growing concern. "You're saying someone's deliberately targeting emergency services?" "Not just targeting, systematically dismantling them in sequence to maximize damage. This is professional-level work, probably state-sponsored or organized crime. They know exactly which systems to hit and in what order to create the most chaos." Rodriguez's radio erupted with a desperate call. "All units, we have multiple ambulances lost in the system. 3 cardiac arrest calls with no ETA to hospitals. Dispatch is showing phantom locations." Without thinking, Marcus spoke up. "Tell dispatch to switch to the tertiary routing protocol and bypass the automated GPS coordination. Manual routing, until we can patch the vulnerability." Both officers stared at him. Chen spoke first. "How do you even know about tertiary protocols?" "Because I helped design the current system during a consulting project 2 years ago. The city hired a contractor who subcontracted to smaller firms. I was the one who actually wrote the fail-safe procedures they never implemented." Rodriguez keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We have a consultant here who suggests switching to tertiary routing protocols and manual GPS coordination." The response was immediate. "Unit 47, tertiary protocols are classified. How does your consultant know about—" "Wait, who is this consultant?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. He was stepping into territory where his skin color and unofficial status could make him look like a threat rather than a solution. Tell them to check the 2023 Municipal Security Audit, pages 147 through 203. Marcus Johnson, Lead Systems Analyst. The silence from dispatch lasted 15 seconds, an eternity during an active emergency. Then, Unit 47. We show a Marcus Johnson listed as primary author on several classified security protocols. Is he available to assist with current system compromises? Chen whistled low. You actually did help design their systems. I did more than help design them, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. I identified 17 critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited exactly like this. I submitted a 40-page report recommending security upgrades. The city chose not to implement them due to budget constraints. Rodriguez was now listening to his radio with new urgency. Dispatch was coordinating with someone higher up the chain, and Marcus could hear fragments of conversations about bringing in federal cybersecurity teams and emergency IT contractors. How long would it take the feds to respond to something like this? Rodriguez asked. In Chicago? Minimum 2 hours to get the right people here, another hour to assess the situation, then several more hours to understand the specific vulnerabilities. By then, people will have died in ambulances that couldn't find hospitals, or in fires that trucks couldn't locate. Marcus's phone buzzed with a new alert that made his blood freeze. They just penetrated the hospital life support networks, ICU. Equipment at Northwestern Memorial is showing system errors. Jesus Christ, Chen breathed. Can you stop this? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus looked at these two officers who had stopped him for walking while black and who were now asking him to save their city. The irony wasn't lost on him, but neither was the responsibility. I can try, he said simply, but I need access to the Municipal Network Operations Center, and I need them to trust me enough to let me work. Rodriguez keyed his radio again. Dispatch, our consultant says he can attempt to counter the attack, but he needs direct access to network operations. The EE response came swiftly. Unit 47, we're patching you through to Commander Walsh and IT Director Sarah Fleming. They want to speak directly with your consultant. Marcus took the radio with steady hands. This is Marcus Johnson. I'm looking at a sophisticated attack targeting sequential vulnerabilities in your infrastructure network. The attackers are using a combination of DDoS flooding and privilege escalation to move laterally through your systems. A woman's voice came through clearly. Mr. Johnson, this is Sarah Fleming, IT Director. I remember your security audit. You predicted almost exactly this type of attack. Yes, ma'am. I can see the attack vectors they're using. The good news is that I built several emergency patches when I was working on your systems. The bad news is that stopping this requires implementing those patches manually, which means someone needs to physically access your core servers. Commander Walsh's voice cut in. How long do you need? Marcus looked at his phone, calculating the spreading damage. If I can get to your operations center in the next 20 minutes, I can probably stop the worst of it. But we need to move now. They're about to hit the traffic control systems, and once they do that during evening rush hour, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood the implications. Rodriguez was already moving toward the patrol car. Unit 47 requesting emergency escort to Network Operations Center. We have our consultant. As they climbed into the police car, Marcus in the front passenger seat, a position that would have seemed impossible 30 minutes earlier, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just embarrassment or frustration anymore. This was the moment when his expertise finally mattered more than their assumptions. And for the first time in years, he wasn't hiding who he really was. In his small apartment in Bronzeville, the walls were lined with framed certificates and awards that told a story Marcus rarely shared with anyone. His MIT diploma hung next to commendations from the Department of Homeland Security, recognition from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and a letter of appreciation from the mayor of Boston for preventing a cyber attack on their transit system. His desk sat a worn leather portfolio, his father's, from his days as a civil rights lawyer in Alabama. Inside those pages were Marcus's first published papers on cybersecurity, articles that had appeared in top-tier journals while he was still a graduate student, and documentation of the 18 patents he held in encryption technology that were now worth millions of dollars to other people. Back in 2019, Marcus had been the rising star of Boston's tech scene. His company, Fortress Digital, had contracts with 3 major banks and was being courted by venture capitalists who saw his work as the future of financial cybersecurity. He'd been featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at international conferences, and offered positions that would have set him up for life. The last time he'd carried that portfolio into a boardroom, he'd been presenting a revolutionary approach to quantum-resistant encryption that could have protected the entire U.S. financial system from next-generation cyber attacks. The meeting had gone perfectly until he'd received the call that changed everything. His younger sister Keisha, just 22 and finishing her nursing degree in Chicago, had been diagnosed with acute leukemia. The doctors gave her 6 months without aggressive treatment, maybe 2 years with it. But the treatment would require experimental procedures not covered by insurance and constant care from family members. Marcus had sold his company, liquidated his stock options, and moved to Chicago within a week. For 2 years, he'd lived between hospital rooms and treatment centers, watching Keisha fight a battle that drained not just her strength, but every dollar he'd saved. When she'd finally won, when the doctors declared her cancer-free, Marcus had been left with nothing but his expertise and a city that didn't seem to want it. He'd never regretted the choice. Keisha was alive, healthy, and now working as a pediatric nurse at the same hospital where she'd been treated. But Marcus had discovered that stepping away from the tech world, even for the best reasons, meant becoming invisible to it. Without an active corporate position or venture capital backing, his credentials became just pieces of paper to HR departments that couldn't see past his zip code and the color of his skin. But this time, as the police car raced through Chicago's streets, toward the Network Operations Center, Marcus didn't feel the familiar sting of being overlooked. Instead, he felt the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where he needed to be. "Tell me something," Officer Rodriguez said, as they navigated through traffic with sirens blaring. "If you're really this cybersecurity genius, why are you working out of internet cafes instead of some big corporate office?" Marcus looked out at the city lights blurring past. "Because 2 years ago, my sister was dying, and saving her meant more to me than saving my career." The car fell silent except for the constant chatter of emergency radio traffic. Chen turned from the back seat. "That's why you came back to Chicago?" "I gave up everything I'd built to take care of her. Sold my company, spent my savings on experimental treatments, lived in hospital waiting rooms for months. When she got better, I tried to rebuild, but the tech world moves fast. Missed 2 years. And suddenly, you're nobody again." "But you kept working in cybersecurity?" "I never stopped. I just started working for people who actually needed help, instead of people who could afford to pay premium rates. Corner stores getting hit by ransomware, community health centers trying to protect patient data, churches whose donation systems got hacked by criminals." Rodriguez glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "And you're okay with that?" Marcus considered the question as they pulled into the government complex, where the Network Operations Center was housed. Through the windows he could see technicians moving frantically between servers, their faces lit by the glow of emergency status screens. "I used to think success meant being recognized by people who mattered," he said quietly. "Now, I think it means mattering to people who need you." They climbed out of the car, and Marcus grabbed his laptop from his backpack. The worn leather portfolio remained in his apartment, but everything he really needed was in his head and his hands. "There it is," he whispered to himself as they approached the building where he was about to save a city that had never properly seen him. It was always there. As they walked through the security checkpoint, Marcus now accompanied by police escort rather than detained by it, he realized that expertise had never left him. It had just been waiting for a moment when being invisible was exactly what made him powerful. The Network Operations Center hummed with desperate energy when Marcus stepped inside at 9:47 p.m. Banks of monitors displayed cascading system failures across Chicago's digital infrastructure, while technicians moved frantically between workstations, their faces reflecting the glow of critical alerts. Director Sarah Fleming met them at the entrance, her professional composure barely concealing exhaustion and panic. "Mr. Johnson, thank God. We've got 43 critical systems compromised, emergency services are operating at maybe 30% capacity, and our federal backup team won't arrive for at least 90 minutes. Marcus surveyed the chaos, his mind automatically cataloging the attack patterns displayed across the screens. This is a variant of the Stuxnet approach. They're targeting industrial control systems while simultaneously flooding your network capacity. Smart, destructive, but not unpredictable. He moved to an empty workstation and began connecting his laptop to the municipal network through a secure terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision, pulling up diagnostic screens that most of the room's technicians had never seen. "First priority is restoring emergency dispatch routing," he announced to the room. "I'm bypassing the compromised servers and routing 911 calls through the backup academic network at University of Chicago. It's not ideal, but it'll work." Lines of code flowed across his screen as Marcus implemented the emergency protocols he'd developed years earlier. Within minutes, the frantic radio chatter from police dispatch began to calm as ambulances started, reaching their destinations again. "How did you?" Fleming started to ask. "I built redundancy into the system design, but your procurement department chose the cheaper option that didn't include my recommendations," Marcus replied without looking up. "The protocols were always there, just not activated. 20 minutes. Passed in focused silence, broken only by the sound of Marcus's typing and the gradually improving reports from dispatch. He moved through the city's digital infrastructure like a surgeon, identifying compromised nodes and rerouting traffic through clean pathways. "Hospital networks are stabilizing," reported one of the technicians, amazement clear in her voice. Marcus nodded, his attention focused on a more complex problem. "The attackers are persistent. They're adapting to my countermeasures in real time, which means this isn't just malware. There's human intelligence behind it." He pulled up a network visualization that showed the attack's structure in three-dimensional space, connection points and data flows creating a complex web of intrusion and defense. "There," he said, pointing to a cluster of suspicious activity. "They're using a botnet of compromised IoT devices to maintain their foothold. Traffic cameras, smart thermostats, connected car systems, anything with an internet connection becomes part of their attack network." Fleming leaned over his shoulder. "Can you shut it down?" "Not shut it down. Something better." Marcus's fingers moved even faster, writing custom scripts that would turn the attackers' strategy against them. "I'm going to make their botnet work for us instead." The room watched in fascination as Marcus implemented what he called digital Aikido, redirecting the attackers' own tools to isolate and neutralize their access points. Within 30 minutes, the cascading red alerts on the monitoring screens began turning green. Traffic control systems are back online, reported another. Technician, emergency dispatch showing full functionality, added another. Hospital networks reporting all critical systems operational. Marcus leaned back in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead despite the room's air conditioning. On the central display, Chicago's digital infrastructure showed stable and secure, with his countermeasures still actively hunting down the last traces of the attack. "It's over," he said quietly. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus was already focused on his laptop, documenting the attack vectors and writing a comprehensive report. "You need to implement the security protocols I recommended 2 years ago," he told Fleming. "Tonight's attack exploited exactly the vulnerabilities I identified. This won't be the last attempt." Commander Walsh, who had arrived during the response effort, stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson, the city owes you a debt we can't possibly repay. How many lives do you think you saved tonight?" Marcus considered the question as he saved his analysis files. "I don't know, but I know we prevented something that could have been catastrophic. When emergency services go down during peak hours, people die. Simple as that." As the immediate crisis passed and normal operations resumed, Marcus began packing up his laptop. The room's energy was shifting from emergency response to celebration, but he felt the familiar urge to fade back into invisibility. "Where are you going?" Fleming asked. "Home. You've got everything you need for now, and I have a full security assessment to write up." Officer Rodriguez, who had remained in the operations center throughout the response, stepped forward. "Marcus, what you did tonight. This changes everything, doesn't it?" Marcus paused at the door, his worn backpack slung over his shoulder. For 6 years, he'd moved through Chicago like a ghost, his expertise hidden beneath assumptions about who belonged, in what spaces. Tonight, he'd saved the city that had consistently overlooked him. "No," he said with quiet dignity. "It doesn't change anything. It just reveals what was always there." Within 24 hours, security camera footage from the network operations center had been reviewed by the mayor's office, the police commissioner, and federal cybersecurity officials. The quiet man in the worn jacket, typing with surgical precision while chaos swirled around him, had become the subject of intense official interest. They found Marcus's name in dozens of official documents, security assessments, patent filings, academic publications, and consulting agreements that painted a picture of expertise far beyond what anyone had imagined. The MIT graduate who had prevented a municipal catastrophe was the same person who had been stopped on the street for the crime of walking while black. The meeting was held in City Hall, in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Loop. Marcus sat across from Mayor Patricia Williams, Police Commissioner Robert Chen, IT Director Sarah Fleming, and Officer Rodriguez, the same man who had pulled him over 36 hours earlier. "Mr. Johnson," Mayor Williams began, her voice carrying a weight of institutional embarrassment, "we need to talk about what happened Tuesday night." Marcus placed his worn leather portfolio on the conference table, his father's old case, now carrying the documentation of his own achievements. Inside were his MIT degrees, his cybersecurity certifications, copies of his published research, and the comprehensive security assessment he'd completed at 3 a.m. after saving the city's digital infrastructure. "You want to know who I am?" he said, calmly. "So, I'll tell you." He opened the portfolio methodically, laying out documents that told the story of Marcus Johnson. Not the invisible man walking through their neighborhoods, but the expert they had consistently failed to recognize. "I graduated summa cum laude from MIT with dual master's degrees in computer science and cybersecurity. My thesis on quantum-resistant encryption has been cited over 400 times in academic literature, and forms the foundation for current federal cybersecurity protocols. Commissioner Chen shifted uncomfortably as Marcus continued. I've published 17 peer-reviewed papers on infrastructure security, hold 18 patents in encryption technology, and have consulted for the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and 3 major financial institutions. He pulled out a thick folder of rejection letters, dozens of them, from Chicago-area companies who had passed on his applications over the past 6 years. I founded Fortress Digital, a cybersecurity firm that was valued at $12 million when I sold it in 2022 to pay for my sister's cancer treatment. I liquidated everything I had built because family mattered more than profit. Mayor Williams studied the documents, her expression growing more somber with each credential. Mr. Johnson, why didn't you mention any of this when you applied for positions with city contractors? I did mention it. It's all in my applications, which are probably still sitting in HR databases marked not a good fit. Marcus's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath. The question isn't why I didn't mention it. The question is why no one bothered to look. Officer Rodriguez spoke for the first time. Marcus, I owe you an apology that goes deeper than words. I stopped you because I made assumptions based on how you looked and where you were walking. You stopped me because you're trained to see certain people as threats rather than assets, Marcus replied. Tuesday night, that assumption almost cost lives. Fleming leaned forward, her technical background making her more aware than the others of Marcus's true credentials. The security protocols you implemented during the attack, they weren't just emergency measures, were they? You'd planned for this exact scenario. Marcus nodded. In 2023, I submitted a comprehensive security assessment identifying 17 critical vulnerabilities in the city's infrastructure network. I provided detailed recommendations for addressing each one, including the emergency protocols that saved the city Tuesday night. What happened to those recommendations? Mayor Williams asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. They were deemed too expensive to implement by the procurement committee. The city chose to accept the risk rather than invest in prevention. The room fell silent. Through the windows, Chicago stretched out below them. The city Marcus had protected while remaining invisible to the very people now seeking to understand their failure. Commissioner Chen cleared his throat. Mr. Johnson, we're prepared to offer you a formal position as Director of Municipal Cybersecurity, with full authority to implement your security recommendations and a budget commensurate with— No, Marcus interrupted quietly. The refusal hung in the air like an unexpected thunderclap. No? Mayor Williams repeated. Marcus began returning documents to his father's portfolio. I've spent 6 years applying for positions where I could contribute to this city's security and well-being. 6 years of being told I wasn't qualified, wasn't the right fit, wasn't what you were looking for. He stood, the portfolio tucked under his arm. I didn't leave cybersecurity. Cybersecurity never left me. I just had to walk away from institutions that couldn't see past their own prejudices to recognize expertise when it was standing right in front of them. Then what do you want? Commissioner Chen asked. Marcus paused at the door, looking back at the officials who had finally been forced to see him clearly. I want to do exactly what I've been doing for 6 years, protecting people who need protection. The difference is, now you know who I really am. The next morning, Marcus stepped into Rosa's diner like he had hundreds of times before. But something fundamental had shifted in the 48 hours since Officer Rodriguez had flashed those lights behind him. The morning news was playing on the small television above the counter, and his story, the quiet cybersecurity expert who had saved Chicago's emergency services, was the lead segment. The diner fell silent as customers recognized him from the news footage. Then Rosa Martinez began clapping, her hands creating a rhythm that spread throughout the small restaurant. Other patrons joined in, the construction workers grabbing coffee before their shift, the nurse heading home from the night shift at Northwestern Memorial, the elderly man who came in every morning for oatmeal and the Tribune. Marcus Johnson, Rosa announced to the room, saved this entire city, while the police were questioning why he was walking down the street. The applause grew stronger, and Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just recognition, but the right kind of recognition. These weren't executives impressed by his credentials or politicians managing a crisis. These were neighbors acknowledging one of their own. Later that morning, his phone began ringing with calls from reporters, job offers from tech companies, and invitations to speak at conferences. But the call that mattered most came from Dr. Sarah Peterson at the University of Chicago. "Professor Johnson," she said, using a title he'd never held, but somehow fit perfectly, "we'd like to offer you a position heading our new Institute for Community Cybersecurity. Full tenure track, research budget, and here's the important part. Your mandate would be protecting vulnerable communities from cyber threats." The offer was generous, prestigious, and exactly aligned with his expertise. But Marcus had one condition. "I want to maintain my community practice," he said. "The corner stores, the community health centers, the small nonprofits who can't afford enterprise-level security. They don't stop needing protection just because I have an office at the university." "Done," Dr. Peterson agreed immediately. "In fact, that community engagement is exactly why we want you. Academic cybersecurity needs to connect with real-world applications, and you've proven that protection shouldn't be a luxury only big institutions can afford." That evening, Marcus found himself standing before a packed auditorium at the University of Chicago. Students, faculty, community leaders, and technology professionals had come to hear from the man who had become a symbol of overlooked expertise finally being recognized. He stepped up to the podium and looked out at the diverse crowd, seeing faces that reflected every part of Chicago's complex identity. "3 nights ago, I was stopped by police for walking while black through a neighborhood where I didn't belong," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. 40 minutes later, those same officers were escorting me to save the city's emergency services from a cyber attack that could have cost lives. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. This isn't a story about me being a hero. This is a story about how our assumptions blind us to the resources right in front of us. How many brilliant people are we overlooking because they don't fit our mental image of expertise? How many solutions are we missing because we can't see past skin color, zip codes, or economic status? Marcus paused, thinking about his father's leather portfolio, about Keisha fighting cancer while he held her hand, about Rosa treating him with dignity when corporate America wouldn't return his calls. Real cybersecurity isn't about protecting institutions from outsiders. It's about building systems that protect everyone, especially the most vulnerable. It's about recognizing that expertise grows in every community, and our job is to nurture it wherever we find it. The applause was thunderous, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Tomorrow, I start work at this university, but I'm not leaving the communities where I learned what cybersecurity really means. Every morning, I'll still stop by Rosa's diner for coffee. I'll still help the corner store with their payment processing security. I'll still make house calls to fix computers for elderly residents who can't afford commercial tech support." He gestured toward the audience, where he could see Rosa Martinez sitting in the front row next to Officer Rodriguez, who had asked to attend. Because cybersecurity isn't just about protecting data. It's about protecting people. And the best way to protect people is to remember that everyone deserves both dignity and security, regardless of what neighborhood they walk through or what assumptions others make about them. The entire room stood, applause washing over him like a wave. But Marcus was looking at the back of the auditorium, where a young black woman in scrubs was clapping and crying simultaneously. Keisha had made it to his speech after finishing her shift at the pediatric ward. As the applause continued, Marcus realized this wasn't vindication. It was transformation, not just of how others saw him, but of how he understood his own power. For 6 years, he'd thought he was waiting for recognition. Now he understood he'd been building something more important: the ability to protect his community while staying true to who he'd always been. 6 months later, Marcus walks through the same Chicago neighborhood where Officer Rodriguez first stopped him, but now he carries himself differently, not with arrogance or bitterness, but with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by others' recognition of it. The Institute for Community Cybersecurity has become a national model, protecting over 200 small businesses and nonprofits across Chicago from cyber threats. His students, many of them young people from underrepresented communities, are learning that expertise isn't about fitting into existing structures, but about building better ones. Rosa's Diner still serves as his unofficial second office, where community members bring their technology problems and he solves them over coffee and conversation. The framed newspaper article about his heroic night hangs on the wall, but Rosa insists it's not about that one dramatic moment. Marcus was always a hero, she tells new customers. We just had to wait for the rest of the world to catch up. Officer Rodriguez has become an unlikely ally, speaking at police training sessions about the dangers of assumption-based policing and the importance of seeing community members as resources rather than threats. He and Marcus have developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to making Chicago safer for everyone. Keisha, now a charge nurse at Northwestern Memorial, often jokes that her big brother saved the city's hospital systems just to make sure she could keep doing her job. But she knows the deeper truth, that Marcus's real superpower was never his technical expertise. It was his ability to maintain his humanity and sense of service despite years of being invisible. The Institute's motto, written in Marcus's careful handwriting on the wall of their community lab, reads, "Security is not a privilege. Protection is not a luxury. Everyone deserves both." Marcus's story reminds us that brilliance exists in every community, often in forms we don't expect from people we overlook. The person bagging your groceries might be a published poet. The janitor in your office building might be a licensed engineer. The young man walking through your neighborhood might be the expert who saves your city. True security, whether digital or social, comes from recognizing and nurturing expertise wherever it grows, from building systems that protect everyone, and from understanding that our assumptions about who belongs where are often the greatest threats to our collective safety. Sometimes the most powerful solutions come from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes being underestimated is exactly what makes you powerful enough to protect everyone else.